Hey everyone, let's jump right into this explainer where we are exploring the real, highly scientific toolkit used to manage Sri Lanka's wildlife. Now, we often picture wildlife conservation as, simply putting a giant fence around a beautiful forest and just letting nature take its course. But the reality? Well, it's a deeply complex, highly active, and honestly, sometimes surprising science. Today, we're going to prove that managing wildlife is about far, far more than just leaving it alone.
Here is our manager's survival guide for today. We're going to cover, first, more than just protection, then healing fractured habitats, the Ecosystem Balancing Act, managing the human footprint, and finally, solving human-wildlife conflict. Let's get into it.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, more than just protection, where we'll be debunking some major conservation myths.
It is surprisingly easy to get confused by the animals we're actually looking at out there. When you go on a safari, you probably assume every single animal you see is wild. But scientifically speaking, that's not always true. A true wild animal, like a jackal, is of natural origin and lives in its natural habitat. But what about those buffalo you see roaming totally free in Yale National Park? Well, many of them are actually what we call feral. They're essentially escaped domestic animals that have just reverted to living out in the wild. As managers, knowing an animal's true origin is step one.
A really common mistake is thinking management just means protecting animals at all costs. But the real rule of wildlife management is way more dynamic than that. So the crucial point here is this. We actually have to manage populations up when they're threatened, think leopards or sloth bears, and down when they become a problem, like wild boars or macaques that are causing severe agricultural damage. We are constantly trying to steer a population toward a healthy target level, not just blindly protecting everything we see.
Moving right along to Section 2, healing fractured habitats and the AEI threat.
Picture a road, a farm, or a town slicing right through a forest. That creates a phenomenon called habitat fragmentation. And if you want to easily remember the three main destructive results of this, just keep the vowels AEI in mind: area loss, edge effects, and isolation. Smaller patches of forest simply mean fewer species can survive there. Animals become isolated from their breeding partners, which severely threatens their genetics. But it's actually that middle vowel, edge effects, that creates one of nature's most fascinating and dangerous illusions.
Guys, what happens at that newly created forest edge is an absolute trap. Literally. When a road is cut, extra sunlight suddenly reaches the exposed side of the forest. This new light grows really dense, leafy plants, which then attracts a huge number of insects. And those insects, they attract forest insect-eating animals. But here is the massive catch. Because they're hanging out right at the edge of the forest rather than deep inside the safe core, they are highly exposed. These newly created edges form a totally counterintuitive ecological trap where animals are lured right into the jaws of waiting predators. No way around it.
So, to heal these fractured landscapes and prevent these traps, managers have to build bridges, sometimes literal ones like canopy crossings over roads or carefully planted habitat corridors. Now, this physical bridge is what we call structural connectivity, but simply building it isn't the end of the job. You have to actually monitor if the ecological processes are happening. Are the animals actively migrating across it? Achieving that ultimate goal is what we call functional connectivity.
Okay, Section 3, the Ecosystem Balancing Act. We are talking fire, weeds, and water.
Think about the famous Minaria elephant gathering. It is one of the most spectacular wildlife events on Earth, where up to 400 Asian elephants gather during the dry season. But why are they there? Well, because as the reservoir water recedes, it exposes fresh, lush grass. And this is a critical fact. Grass makes up a massive 50% of a Sri Lankan elephant's diet, half of their food. Their entire survival absolutely hinges on it.
But here's the thing about nature. It never stays still. Through a natural process called ecological succession, grasslands slowly evolve over time into scrublands and eventually into dense forest. A really fascinating satellite study of Utawalawe National Park between 2005 and 2019 showed a staggering reality. Over 50% of its vital grasslands naturally turned into scrub that elephants simply cannot eat. If managers don't intervene, that food supply literally vanishes. So, what's the solution? How do you stop a forest from growing? Well, you burn it. To purposefully maintain those vital grasslands, managers use a powerful tool called prescribed burning. But obviously, setting fire to a national park is incredibly risky, so managers carefully follow the time safety checklist. They consider the timing of nesting seasons, they investigate escape routes to ensure animals aren't trapped, they move animals gently before ever lighting a match, and they especially protect young, vulnerable wildlife. It's an extreme but completely necessary balancing act.
Now, human access to these delicate ecosystems is strictly balanced by the law. The Department of Wildlife Conservation meticulously ranks protected zones. At the absolute top tier, we have strict nature reserves, where absolutely no human activity is allowed, not even for you or me. Next down are national parks, which do allow regulated public visits. Then nature reserves, allowing some traditional human activities. And finally, sanctuaries, which are the most lenient and can actually even include private land.
On to Section 4, Managing the Human Footprint and the Invisible Cost of Ecotourism.
This brings us to a massive, real-world management challenge. How do authorities mathematically calculate the exact number of visitors a park can sustainably handle before the wildlife suffers? It's not just a guessing game, folks. It is a very strict calculation. Managers first calculate what's known as the physical carrying capacity. This is literally just the raw math of road space, how many Jeeps can physically fit on the dirt tracks while keeping a safe distance from each other. But that base number is always way too high, so they shrink that number down to find the real carrying capacity by subtracting a penalty percentage. This corrective factor actively accounts for the actual disturbance tourists cause to the animals.
And this disturbance penalty, it is completely justified by the data. A super interesting case study in Utawalawe proved this. Researchers just watched elephants feed. When visitors were completely absent, elephants fed 3.64 times per 10-minute window. But just by tourists being parked within 30 meters, even if those tourists were being perfectly quiet, that feeding drops significantly to 2.71. That means the mere sight of our Jeeps induces stress and literally steals vital calories from these massive animals.
Which brings us to our fifth and final section, solving human-wildlife conflict by treating the cause.
So when elephants lose that vital feeding time to tourist stress, or they lose their grassland habitat to natural scrub, they get hungry. And what happens next? They wander into border villages in search of crops, bringing us to the final battleground of management. When crops are destroyed, the immediate human reaction is anger, for sure, and a demand to just remove the animal right away. But the golden rule of managing problem animals, from crop-raiding elephants to roof-damaging macaques, is to fix the underlying environmental cause rather than just reacting to the damage. Why is the animal there in the first place? Usually it's because the carrying capacity of the human habitat, like all our easily accessible garbage, is just too high, while the natural resources inside the park have gotten too low.
This is absolutely crucial to understand. Capturing and forcibly moving a problem elephant, a process known as translocation, is a fundamentally flawed strategy. Science shows us it repeatedly fails. Why? Because animals have incredibly strong sight fidelity. If you drug an elephant, load it onto a truck, and drop it in a totally new park, it will simply try to walk right back home, often tearing through brand new villages along the way. Furthermore, managers sometimes accidentally capture the wrong elephant. They might take a lone, healthy male, while the real crop raiders, the female herds, just get left behind.
Instead of those cruel and dangerous translocations, the scientific toolkit offers much better, root-cause solutions. Managers focus on increasing the carrying capacity inside the parks, removing invasive weeds, doing those prescribed burns to grow fresh grass, and building water holes so the animals never even want to leave in the first place. They map out ancient movement corridors and clear fences so elephants can migrate naturally. And critically, they focus heavily on compensating and working with the local communities who share the borders with these giants.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought. We've seen today that wildlife management isn't really about managing the animals at all. It's almost entirely about managing human impact. From the roads we carve out, to the Jeep traffic we create on our holidays, to the food waste we leave out from macaques. Our own daily footprint plays a huge part in this delicate scientific balancing act. So I have to ask, what habit can you change today to give the wild just a little more room to breathe? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Wildlife Manager's Toolkit.